Right, good morning everybody and welcome to today's meetings of the local pension board. It's Monday the 8th of November. This meeting is being broadcast live via YouTube and it will be available for viewing after the meeting. Today we've had apologies from Ruth Gilbert and I believe Councillor Pantling. My first item is the chairman's announcement, and I would like to let our members know that Divya Haller has resigned from this board. So I just have to put my thanks to Divya on record for her long-standing commitment and her contributions to this board, I believe, since the start in 2015. And it has been a commitment of hers to progressing the governance of the board, which led to the creation of the new terms of references. So thank you very much indeed. And it is Manjit who is replacing her until the next AGM. Item number 1 on our agenda are the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of August. And I propose, hang on, I'm just looking, they are page 3 to 6 on your agenda. And may I ask that they're taken as read and confirmed and signed. Have we got everybody in agreement? So that looks like that. So are there any comments on the minutes from page 4 to page 6? And for some reason, I can't see much on my screen today, but you just have to shout up. There are none except for me. To Ian, please, very quickly, because I can't find a reference in the reports anywhere. On page 4, little 4, there is a in response regarding to the cost cap going on, blah, blah, blah. Hymans Robertsons are aware of a judicial review that unions had raised regarding the cost case. Is there anything that you can update us on that point, Ian? Thank you.
Good morning. I was going to touch on that within my quarterly admin report, Councillor Page, if I may, if that's okay.
We'll use that then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, then we'll go straight over to item number 2. I have received no questions. Item number 3 on the agenda is to advise of any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent. And I have not been notified of any urgent items. So I move straight on to declaration of interest in respect of any items on the agenda. And I assume it is first Mr. Shepherd. Interest.
Thank you very much. I will just declare, as they're all referred to in the papers, I'm a member of Chelmsford Borough Council. I'm also on the management committee for EMSS and ESPO. Thank you.
Yes. Is there anybody else? I can see no hands up. And of course, I mean, the minutes always refer that I'm also a member of Harborough District Council. Right, we then move to item 5 on our agenda. That's our first report, and that is the administration report, July to September 21, quarter 2, page 7 to 26 on your agenda. And Ian will take over now. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Yeah, good morning, everybody. Hope you're all well. This is the report for quarter 2, July to September 2021. It's similar format and layout as I normally provide to the board for the quarterly admin report. So it covers a number of the governance areas that we'll go through. I'll go through it step by step, if I may. If there's any points that the board wish to raise, then I will take those back if there are any concerns to the Pensions Committee. So I just wish to start by making that point. So as I say, this covers the stats from July to September 2021. I think I'd like to start by going to the Appendix A, which is the key performance indicators, which are on page 20 of the report, if I may. These KPIs we have in the reports, in each report. I'm just going to go through to page 20. Here we are. The table shows the results in the quarter. So the three columns, three areas on the left are the business processes, and those on the right are the customer feedback. I just wish to note that some of the business processes are below target. Whilst they're close to target, they are below. We've had an extremely challenging quarter in terms of volumes of work coming into the section. It's been an extremely busy quarter, and we've managed well, but I do wish to point that there are some slight drops there in terms of benefit members receiving benefits with 10 days of the paperwork being received, which is at 87% rather than 92%, which is the target, and death benefits only 1% below target at 89% rather than 90%. But I just do wish to point out that I think it would be remiss of me not to mention the volumes of work coming in, which is impacting on that. In terms of the customer perspective, which are the figures on the right-hand side of the table, I'm pretty pleased with all of those. The experience of the section is slightly below target, 91% rather than 95%. They really have been results from the delays that it's been taking us to get benefits processed, and also returning estimates. We've had a lot of estimate requests coming in, and this continues this quarter as well, what we've seen so far in this quarter. But other than that, I think the results are good. So I just wanted to go to that first on Appendix A. But if I go back up to pages 8 and onwards, and I'm happy to obviously carry on talking through. The figures are those reflected in the workloads in July, August and September. The cases completed, the remaining cases at the end of each period, and the figures on the right hand side of the tables are what I feel are the maximum numbers that we shouldn't be trying to go above. So you'll see that some of the figures are higher than what we would ideally wish to see, particularly on preserved benefits, which are high and remain high. That said, we have been concentrating on specific areas of preserved benefits for the evaluation work, and that has progressed really, really well. And we've completed the stabilised employer preserved benefits in terms for the valuation, and we're now moving on to the largest further education establishments. So whilst the numbers are high, we are targeting the urgent cases for the valuation. In terms of other areas, complaints, the IDRPs, we only received one IDRP stage 2 in the quarter, and that case was completed by the employer, which was a good resolution. Existing cases are progressing, as you can see in the table, in the report at page 10 on point 10. The one area I did just wish to mention in regards to complaints, whilst it's not directly complaints, I think it's something that the board should be aware of. We've started to receive a small number of claims brought about by claims management companies known as CMCs. These are effectively no win, no fee arrangements that will take a cut in any compensation paid. And these are basically people who've transferred out benefits potentially many years ago, that the receiving scheme has now been identified as effectively bad advice or a scam. Scam is the worst case scenarios. So we are starting to see an increase on those, not massively, but they're starting to filter through. We aren't alone. This is they seem to be targeting many pension schemes, of which the LGPS is certainly one of those. And we are starting to see that. We have taken external legal advice regarding this situation because, as you can imagine, transfer values are not low values. Some of them are very significant values. So we are talking about significant values of money there that we're having to effectively defend. I wasn't going to significantly touch on the data improvement areas, other than to say it's progressing positively. There are a small number of the largest phase 1 employers where we're still working with them. Those mainly are the key ones that we're trying to resolve in terms of getting their positive solution are St Thomas Aquinas, Rutland County Council and EPM, who administer several payrolls for several of the employers. They're the key groups that we're concentrating on. But what I thought was useful was if I take you to the table in point 19, I think that gives you an indication of how this is progressing as a section. So as at 15th of October, we have 136 of the 190 employers now live working on iConnect doing monthly contribution posting, which is excellent. And that covers 33,230 active members out of 35,730, which when you look at the numbers of active members now being monthly posted, that's 93%. Which is a significant number of the value in the fund. In terms of employers, it's 72%, which kind of indicates that those employers left tend to now be the smaller employers that we're working through. So I think that's good. That's a positive step, and we're progressing that continually. In terms of breaches, there were no quarterly breaches in the quarter, so there was nothing to report as material. Year end was positively concluded, and we met the statutory deadline of the 31st of August. Nearly 34,500 members received their annual benefit statement online. A further 441 received them via paper as requested by those individual members. Of the total scheme membership, only 14 members did not receive their annual benefit statements, and they cover 2 of the admission bodies where the outstanding legal agreement is still outstanding, which we'll come to later in the report. In addition to that, nearly 30,000 preserved members' online accounts were reflected with the 2021 pensions increase, and those members can go online to see the value of their preserved benefits. So a significant amount of work completed on year end, all within statutory deadlines, other than those 14 members where the admission agreements weren't signed. In terms of audit, there was one audit internally in the quarter, and that related pensions increase. There were no recommendations in the report, so that was great. In terms of governance around regulations, there were no pension regulation changes, but just to make you aware, MHCLG has changed its name to the Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. So we now fall under DLUHC. Not so easy to remember, I find, and I believe they're now calling themselves the Department for ease. Cost cap. Now this was actually the point Councillor Page mentioned at the start in terms of the minutes from the previous meeting. So I was going to touch on this. There has been some progression on cost cap. This happened in October. So whilst it was actually out of the quarter that this report relates to, I thought it was important it was included. HM Treasury has now decided to proceed with all 3 of the suggested changes for for the 2020 cost cap exercise following the consultation. Those three changes only considering service in the reform schemes, to widen the breach corridor from the ±2% to ±3%, and also to include an economic sense check for breaches linked to long-term gross domestic product. Now, those three changes, what that is expected to do is to widen the funnel, if you like. So the chances of a cost cap breach being either on the high or the low side is reduced significantly. The reason being then that means that we won't be looking at changing member benefits every time there's a breach on the high or the low side. So that means the effective administration should become more standardized and streamlined, because we're not looking at changes to member benefits every 3 years. The key point here, though, is that's from the 2020 exercise. It doesn't cover the 2016 exercise. Okay, so there's still a bit of a niggle here. What's happened on the 2016 exercise is slightly different. What they've agreed and now considered, after taking account of sort of indicative costs from McLeod, they expect the 2016 cost cap will no longer have breached now the McLeod costs have been included. So that 2016 breach is effectively not now expected to happen. However, it doesn't resolve the ongoing legal challenge from the unions. And this was the point that Councillor Page asked at the beginning when raised that question from the previous minutes. So whilst it's expected the 2016 cost cap has now been removed in terms of a breach, the challenge is still there from the unions to question that and challenge that on behalf of their members, because they still feel that the member benefits should still be improved as per the original breach on the low side from 2016. So that point remains outstanding, and I will keep an eye on that, and I will continue to feed back to the board when I know more. So that's an important point. In terms of national governance, other than the change to the new name, we now have a new minister. Luke Hall has now been replaced by Kemi Badenoch, and she'll be looking at moving forward the good governance reports. Fund policies, we've had a look at those. I shan't mention any more about that because I know Stuart has a separate report on the policies, so I won't comment on that any further. In terms of the actuarial valuation preparation, as I say, the data has been worked on for the stabilised employers for the preserved benefits, and that work has been completed, and that information has now actually been sent through to the actuary, and that was only done last week, so it isn't in the report, but that has now been transferred over, which is good. Another area that I wanted to mention, which is a fairly new area, but again, I wanted to mention this to you all for awareness. We're starting to receive inquiries from some of the academies in the fund, only a small number, but it's starting to grow, who are looking at doing what they call full transfers out. That means they're looking at moving their whole scheme membership, so that's active members, preserved members and pensioners, to other funds. And this is where academies are parts of multi-academy trusts. So they're looking to move the academies that sit in other funds across to the fund where the main source of that academy sits, where effectively the HQ sits. We've completed one of these. We're currently working on 2 further cases. They are extremely time consuming and they take up a lot of administrative time. So I'm looking at introducing a cost charge to the employers that request this. There is no impact on scheme members' benefits at all. It's purely administrative. because it's creating a lot of extra work for us, and that's included in one of the reports that Stuart will talk about when it comes to policies. I'm sorry, I am nearly there, folks. I'll keep going. I'm moving on to employer risk. Now, employer risk is the outstanding admission agreements and bonds that you see in each of the reports. What I've done this time is I've done it slightly differently. I've laid it out slightly differently, and I've done it in order of risk. So I've reorganized the table to show effectively one table starting with the highest risk down to the lowest. They are on page 15 from point 49 down onwards. The three highest risk cases are the first three listed. Since I wrote the report, one of those has now completed. So actually one of them is no longer a risk at all. And that's the second one. That's the City Council to Alien Service Sylvester. That's complete. The remaining two are still outstanding, and these are outstanding admission agreements, which is why they are the most highest risk, because effectively these scheme members are no longer active members until the admissions are signed and then backdated. Beacon has been outstanding since the 1st of January, which is coming up to a year, which is simply not good enough. We've been trying our hardest to get this resolved, and we're unable to do so. The latest update, as at 9 o'clock this morning, is the Academy and the county have both signed the admission, but Hutchinson refused to sign as they have still not agreed the terms of the commercial contract with Beacon, and that's been outstanding since January this year. And because they haven't agreed the contractual commercial terms, they refuse to sign the admission agreement. The other one that's high risk is Life Map to Total Swim. That has progressed positively in the last few weeks, and all parties are now engaged and the signatures are now awaited. So I do expect that one to complete shortly, but the first one does give me concern. I wasn't proposing to talk through all of these in the reports, but you can see they start at the highest and then they work down to the lowest. The medium highs are still admission agreements outstanding, but they're much more recent, and then all parties are engaging, so they are being worked through. So it's the top one really that gives me the greatest concern, and then we work our way down to the lowest, which are effectively where the admission is already there, but there is a bond that's not been signed, either a replacement bond or an updated bond, but again they're being worked through. And the final thing from me is the governance on knowledge and understanding. I see that board and committee members are completing the Hyman's online training, where we're asking them to concentrate on particular items. If I may ask you to continue to look at that. The areas that are particularly of interest really are areas around the valuation, which is coming up, as we all know, and the investments, particularly investments around responsible investments, which is an area that's obviously growing and becoming more and more high importance. That's all I was going to say. I'm sorry that's taken a little while, but that's all I was going to say. So I'm obviously happy, Chair, to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Ian. As always, very much appreciated and very comprehensive. And before I open it up to members, I see Mr. Shepherd has got his hand up, but can I ask a couple of questions? And in reverse order, Kat, could you please send out a reminder in regards of the training and pointing out the two valuation and investment modules to members, to just remind them, please? Yeah. Going back, I do like the way you have put it in high risk order. And my note here was, is there any action required from us as members and as you just said, City is done now, so it only really leaves a beacon. Should we write a letter to point it out to members? Could we sort of look at future, I don't know, a guidance? Because at the end of the day, it is not our fault that there are contractual problems. So that is number one. I appreciate that it has been very busy, and I think we should note it. We should note it again and thank the staff. The other point is number 34. You on page 13, you said about the cost cap and going back to 2016, where the unions are challenging it. What would be the legal implication and possibly the cost implication? And should we add that onto our risks? Then I was going to mention the 14 members that, oh yes, on page 12, on point 26, you said 14 members did not receive an annual statement. Did I understand that right, or did receive a statement? If not, is that because of what? And the other things, which is the important point, page 10, number item or point 14, you were saying about the no claim claims. Now, could that, or what would the future implication have to us in regards of, well, resources, you said, you know, and whatever else? Should we make that a risk, what do you call it? Put it in our risk register to keep an eye on. And there was one more, which I've forgotten now, but that's enough for now. Thank you, Ian.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Taking those in the reverse order then, and I hope I got all these, so stop me if I missed any on the CMCs. We could add them to the risk register. We certainly could. I haven't done yet, I'll be honest, because they are fairly new and we're only getting a few of them, but we certainly are seeing that as an increase in risk. So I'm happy to do that. If we were to lose a challenge, then it would ultimately end up with the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman would make the decision as to what was going to happen. I would expect that to then be a compensatory payment to reinstate either the members' benefits back into the scheme. So effectively, we've paid out a chunk of money and then we've got to reinstate those members' benefits, or an element of compensation that we would pay to the person for loss of pension benefits. Now, I would hope. Can
we guard against it and cover our angles so our Ombudsman reprisals won't be as severe?
Well, I would hope that we wouldn't reach that point, because I think the way we've done it historically is within the regulations and we did things correctly. So I would hope that we wouldn't lose a challenge from a CMC. And if we were to lose one, which would shock me, then I think we would have to follow the regulator, the Ombudsman's decision. How that would then be compensated, I wouldn't know at this stage, because we've never had that situation arise. But I would guess there would have to be some form of compensation paid from either the council or the fund. I honestly don't know the answer to this, Councillor Page, in truth.
Okay.
In terms of adding it to the risk register, then yeah, we could certainly look at doing that. I haven't done that, but I could certainly consider doing that, and monitoring them and keeping you informed. Yeah, I'm happy to do that, certainly. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
In terms of the 14 members and the annual benefit statements, those 14 members, they're the ones that did not receive an annual benefit statement. They're the members that work for Hutchinson's and at Latian, the two admissions. So if I may just take you back to that table, if I may, on page
20, was it? No.
15, page 15, the top two.
Yeah.
Because if you look, when Beacon to Hutchinson, that started on the 1st of January 2021, and City to Latian started on the 12th of February 21. So they both started prior to April 21. Therefore, they needed that information to complete their year end. Therefore, they couldn't have an annual benefit statement because it's already crossed the financial year. The ones below, so the next one, Total Swim, that started on the 7th of June 21. So that's in this tax year. So they year end completed. So the 14 members relate to the two above. Is that okay? The Italian will now get their annual benefit statements, which only then leaves the Hutchinson catering.
That is very useful to know, Ian, because it doesn't point the finger at the authority then.
Oh no, absolutely not, Councillor Page. No, completely. These are only delays because we've been unable to complete them because of the employers.
Really good to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
The cost cap and legal costs and challenges and the risk. The outcome of the legal challenge from the unions, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. No one does at national level. We don't know how this will ultimately transpire. If the unions are to win it, effectively what that means, though, is that members' benefits will be recalculated. So effectively, it's like McLeod. It's like another McLeod. So whilst we're then recalculating benefits for McLeod, we'd then be doing a further benefit recalculation for members on the cost cap. I do know, I'm aware that there are conversations taking place, but I don't know the relevance or the likelihood of this, that there is potentially questions being asked. Could McLeod and cost cap recalculations be clumped into one exercise? So instead of doing two sets of recalculations, you do one to cover both areas. The trouble with that, whilst it makes sense, if that was the outcome, and we've got to be careful, we don't know what the outcome is, and it might be that there is no change at 2016 for the cost cap, but if indeed there was, it would make sense to do one set of recalculations, but then we don't know how long 2016 is going to go on for, which then delays McLeod further. So it's a little bit like which way do you turn? So there's an uncertainty there. In terms of the risk, I could certainly put it on the risk register. It would be a risk without any question to the administration of the section, no question about it at all. So yeah, I'm happy to add that to the risk register as well if you feel that's useful.
Please.
Okay.
And before I go over to members, I'm sure members will join me to agree with you that the academies who are looking towards a full transfer out should be carrying the full cost charge, and I see nodding all around. So Ian, you have got our authority to go ahead, because I think that is actually very, very unacceptable. And I think what we need to do is probably, or you rather, to put something like a small policy or something together that underpins your cost charging. But I leave that to you, and you can always report back if you have a comment.
I do. Stuart actually has already done that for me. So when we come to a future report later in today's meeting that Stuart will present, one of those points is in the admin and comm strategy, and it does include the proposal, which we'd have to have approved by committee, but it's really helpful that you'd support that as a collective. That's really useful. And then that will be then taken to committee and approved. If approved, then we'll be able to do that. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
We will, because I see nodding, and I'm sure Kat will register it. So first is Mr. Shepherd, followed by Manjit. Over to you, Councillor Shepherd. on mute.
Thank you. My question concerned a matter you yourself raised, actually, which is anything useful the board can do to help officers dealing with the Hutchinson's issue?
Yeah, I would very much like that. I've been trying, as my colleagues have, without success. Hutchinson's understand the need to sign the admission agreement, and they aren't suggesting they shouldn't sign it, but they are refusing to sign it because of the ongoing dispute they have with Beacon for the contractual terms. My question I then sent back to them is, well, you've been doing this work and you've been being paid for this work since January, so surely you have a duty to sign the admission agreement, but they refuse to do so. So a letter from the board to both Beacon and to Hutchinson's to give our concerns and our request to complete this would be greatly appreciated, and I'm happy to draft something and share that with yourself, Councillor Page, if that was appropriate. Sorry, Councillor Page, you're on mute. I don't know if.
Sorry, I muted myself then. Yes, I do agree and make it a very stern one because it has been ongoing for long enough.
Thank you. I shall do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shepherd, does that complete your questioning?
It does, thank you, yes.
Thank you. Manjit, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Ian. And just a quickie with regards to the multi-academy trusts that are moving their funds out. You mentioned the impact's not going to be very big on the fund itself generally. Just for my information, is that the equivalent of you saying that the capital cost of the bond is what we're really talking about, which could potentially be moved across? Is that the value of the pension fund? Or
no, Manjit. Do you mean for a bulk transfer where we transfer it? Yeah. No, the way it works, I've never actually expanded this with you all, so it's a very good question, and it's a fairly new area, so it's something I haven't ever discussed with you as a collective. So the way it works, Manjit, is we effectively look at all the active members, the pensioner members, and the preserve members. We provide that information to the fund actuary, who then assess the value of the assets and liabilities for that individual employer. And then they liaise with the new actuary on the receiving scheme, and the two actuaries have to agree the terms of the transfer. Once the agreed terms are completed, then they agree the actual cost value based on that data membership, and that's the value that's paid across. And what that does, Manjit, is once that's been paid, that completely removes all the assets and liabilities in our fund, and we have no further responsibility for those members' benefits at all, including the pensioners and the preserve members. And that's the unusual part here. So we have no responsibility at all from that point onwards. And then it's the responsibility of the new receiving fund to continue to pay the pensions and effectively the preserve benefits in future in the active membership. So it's worked out by the actuaries themselves in terms of the value, Manjit.
But when you mention that there's no impact on our sort of fund itself, that in terms of returns or anything, I think is that what you're referring to, Ian, in terms of?
Yeah, the way it works out is that the value that we pay across, Manjit, effectively removes any future liability for us. So it kind of becomes you can argue a cost neutral kind of exercise, if that makes sense. Yeah, no, because we're paying a load of money out, whatever that value is, but then we haven't got to then pay the pensions or the responsibility of the future benefits from that point onwards either.
Yeah, you're a mind reader. That was going to be my next question. I guess the final bit for me is these just academy trusts, multi-academy trusts that are looking to move out. Is there any sort of potential sort of risk or of other customers of ours moving out because for whatever reason it might be, or is that not on the horizon? No. Because I know we're doing you and your team are doing a brilliant job, so customer satisfaction is very, very high, returns are good, etc. But is there any other even risk that we need to be aware of, do you think? Or
no, not that I'm currently aware of, Manjit. Really, this is only academies that are a part of a multi-academy trust that are multi-fund. So for example, you might have the head office in, say, Nottinghamshire, And you may have, let's just say, for example, you may have 4 or 5 schools within the Nottinghamshire fund, and you might have one in the Leicestershire fund just across the border, and it's moving that one out of the Leicestershire fund to join the others at Notts. And that's really what it is. There's a very occasional inquiry from other employers about kind of closing the scheme, but that's a different issue, Manjit. That's not moving funds.
Sure.
Is that okay?
That's lovely. Thanks a lot, Ian. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
No problem.
Thank you, Manjit. Caroline.
Mine's just a bit of a follow-up question, actually, Ian, to Manjit. So when you presented the paper, the thoughts that were entering my head was, well, what was the benefit to the academies actually doing this? So is it fair to assume it's for administrative purposes on their side?
Well, I shake my head, Caroline, and I'm probably wrong in shaking my head, because partly, yes.
Right.
Partly there's an administrative gain because they're only dealing with one fund.
With one, yes.
Correct. But the main drive is that they believe by encompassing all their information through one fund, they only have to deal with one actuary. Therefore, the value, the employer rate that they pay,
right,
could, and I use the term very, very loosely, could be lower in another fund than it may be with our fund, for example.
Right, that's interesting. I was just trying to work out the rationale there, Ian, because exactly what Manjit said. Why would you want to leave our local government pension scheme with everything that it gives, and the administration on your part is excellent. So yeah, I was just trying to work that out.
Yes,
it's really,
Caroline.
It's really driven by their costs, and they feel that if they bring it all together into one fund, it can reduce their employer contribution rate. But there's a huge caveat I'm going to add here, because at the next valuation, they're going to have more assets and more liabilities potentially in the one fund. So when that's then reassessed by the other fund's actuary, their employer rate could go up, it could go down. So
exactly. So there is a risk there for them, isn't there?
But that's their decision. That's for them to consider. But we explain this to them, but that doesn't necessarily then stop them wishing to
change their minds. Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Ian. That's clear. That's lovely. Thank you.
Actually, Ian, sorry to prolong this. I don't see any further hands up, but I must prolong this because Caroline gave me a follow-up question. You've just said you point all of these things out, and I'm sure you do this in writing. But what happens if these people, and I've seen it before, when they left the services of the county council and thought the grass was greener, and then they come back? So what happens if they want to come back? Do we say, no, you can't come back? And do we make that clear in writing and also put that on our website so the members know? So how do we proceed on that? And could we cover that off so, you know, it covers the whole thing off nicely? Because I can see what happens is they go. It causes us an administrative nightmare and cost. And then they go, oh, whoopee-doo, we left a very good scheme. Now we want to come back. So just cover this off to complete this for me. Thank you.
Certainly. Yeah, there's no risk of them coming back. And that is absolutely clear. And the reason it's absolutely clear is in order for this to actually happen, it has to be approved by the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State puts it in writing who the new administering fund is. So in the example I use, let's say that's Nottinghamshire. If indeed that academy then turned around a year or 2 or 3 years down the line and said, oh, actually, I wish I hadn't done this, I'm afraid then that decision is made. They can't go back because the Secretary of State have then approved Nottinghamshire as their new fund. And that's their administering authority, and they wouldn't then be able to come back and request. Well, they could request, but it wouldn't be approved. It wouldn't be approved.
We have set all of that out in writing, so there is no comeback that they say, oops, we didn't know.
Correct.
Oh, great.
That's all signed off by the Secretary of State as well.
All right, that covers that report. Really interesting. Thank you. And it is Stuart's turn now. Item 6 on the agenda, continuous improvement report. Welcome, Stuart, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone.
Morning.
So this is the now regular report that highlights the main areas within pensions administration that are being worked on with a view to improve how the section operates. So taking member self-service first, registration figures continue to increase, and a summary of the figures are available in Appendix A. We continue to reach out to employers to help with the publicising of the service in the form of articles and adding references to their documentation. With regards to the deferred benefit calculations in bulk, we are continuing to proceed cautiously with this. The main concern is ensuring that the cases selected for this process are those where an official leaver notification has already come in, and that notification does not contain any data that contradicts the data provided automatically through the monthly iConnect submissions. To check these cases is still a manual process, and we need to be able to automate this. We are hopeful that our new Insights reporting tool will allow us to do this. I'll come back to the Insights tool later in the report. With regards to the midterm valuation data, the data issues that my team have been working on have now been resolved, as Ian mentioned in his report, and have been submitted to the fund actuaries Hymans Robertsons for the next step. So we're waiting to hear back from them to see where we go from there. Yep, as touched upon earlier, we have agreed to purchase a new reporting tool for the section developed by our system providers Haywood's called Insights. Arrangements have been made for a small number of colleagues to receive some training, and 3 sessions have been arranged between December and January. So this is a next generation reporting tool which should vastly increase the facilities available to us around reporting on pensions data. The initial plan, though, is to utilise the reports that come with the package as standard, along with a particular report that we have asked for Haywood's to write, which will allow for regular reconciliation of pensioner payroll with administration records. The other main report that we will be using that comes with the package will be using regular monitoring of data quality issues. Once officers have developed the skills to be able to write their own reports, we have a list of areas of development which we will work through. McLeod. So work is underway on the updating of member records in advance of the implementation of the McLeod remedy that is currently scheduled for April 23. This is currently a manual process for our small employers. Regarding the larger employers, there is an automated process that is in place. However, an issue has been identified with this process when we performed an initial load of data for a particular employer, which resulted in some existing data being overwritten, which has produced gaps in data. So the records were identified and corrected, but nevertheless, this is a concern. So the data that we currently received from employers was collected from them using a standard template developed by the LGA in agreement with the system providers, including Haywood, and had an expectation that the data would load correctly. We have raised this with Haywood, who as a result have issued revised guidance documents with warnings inserted for users to be aware of. The issue has also been discussed with the LGA and other authorities at the National Technical Group, of which Ian's a member, where another authority also reported problems. We are currently waiting for a session to be arranged with Haywood to discuss this further, along with another authority, and we're going to go into our particular issues with more depth and develop a way forward. However, until this issue is resolved, no further data will be uploaded using the automated process. With regards to EPIC, the Pensions Employer Database, EPIC, this is now live, and officers are currently exploring how to get maximum use out of the system. In the meantime, an exercise to digitise historic employer documents and to upload those to EPIC is underway. This is quite a lengthy exercise, and that will take some time to complete. Just touching upon good governance, Ian mentioned some of this, but following on from the good governance report dated 24th of May 2021, there's been no further updates. It appears that the government department for this, the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, formerly the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, have many other issues to contend with, and this is likely to impact on the implementation of good governance. However, we've progressed with many of the recommendations arising from the report, and progress is covered in the annual report. So that was all I was going to say. Does anyone have any questions they'd like me to respond to?
That has, as always, been a very informative report again, and it is appreciated. I'm just sort of curious generally. I mean, you've just explained the McLeod, the issue with not having the IT not being up to standard, and you covered that in a way in point 17, I assume, because I've got a great big question mark next to it. But tell me, Stuart, do you know all of this McLeod and all of these things which have been imposed on us? What is the cost absorption, the cost impact? Because we are having to buy new IT systems, and there is an additional resource issue. So how is all of this absorbed? Has it got an impact on the department generally?
Well, so far that the costs have been limited to the supply of one interface tool from our system providers. There hasn't been any other costs other than resource costs at the moment, which Ian had factored into his budget. In terms of the cost, I don't have that to hand in terms of the interface tool that we had, but we were offered a number of options, and we went for the option that allowed us to have most control over this. Ian, I don't know if you've got any figures to hand on the cost, but
I don't have the value to hand. But as Stuart says, Councillor Page, there were 3 options, and we went for option 3, which was the lowest cost, because we wanted to try and retain as much of this in-house as we possibly could, rather than give it purely to the system provider to do that. Yeah. Unfortunately, though, this is where we've now encountered problems, as Stuart says, with the data loading, corrupting member records. And this is why we're desperately requesting, and have been requesting now for a few weeks, a meeting with the pension system provider in order for that to be resolved to move forward. But as Stuart also said, we're not alone in this. Other funds are in the same position, so it's a national issue here. But in terms of the actual cost for the interface, I'm afraid I don't have that to hand, but it was the lowest cost of the 3 options.
No, that makes perfect sense. Thank you for that explanation. I like the idea of keeping as much in-house as possible. It keeps you, very much in the driving seat. Now, I see... Any hands up? Any questions? Councillor Shepherd, Manjit? No. Stuart, you are free to go on to the next one. Thank you for that report.
Thank you.
And the report is noted, and we are going now to item 7, and that's page 37 to 128. And that is a Declan to take over. Good morning, Declan. Welcome to our little soiree, and I hope you're well and warm. And and that is the Pension Fund Annual Report. Thank you. Over to Declan.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I can confirm I'm well, but maybe not so warm, but never mind. This is just obviously an annual report that we've taken. It's just basically looking for comments in advance of the annual report and the accounts going to committee sort of later the month. Just one point to note: we normally try and bring or we did last year anyway, the auditor's opinion on the accounts, but unfortunately the audit has been delayed, which in truth is common with most authorities. So that isn't there yet, but we have had conversations with them, and most of their kind of work on the pension fund audit is complete at this stage. So we're not expecting any significant issues, but if any do arise, we'll obviously report them back to the board, just so you know what's going on. I obviously won't go through the full 100 pages in a huge amount of detail, but I was just going to sort of try and draw out some of the parts that may be of more interest to members. So the first part was just it was sort of page 47, the financial performance, and members will notice, and we'll come back to this in a minute, is that the fees have sort of gone high, and that's basically because if you have a bad year like we did with sort of like on the back of COVID, the financial year kind of creates a little bit of a kind of I suppose an anomaly here, in that sort of last year fees were low, but this year they're kind of the bounce back as the value of assets grows and performance fees and things like that come in. So we'll come back to that a little bit later. But the other piece in that financial performance section is an area where we're probably unusual to quite a few funds, maybe not some of the more sort of northerly ones, but in our pool with LGPS Central, I think there's only a couple of us who are still cash flow positive, and it does help a lot with the management of the investments, because it just means that you're not a forced seller and that you can have a bit of flexibility to kind of change your asset allocation in kind of quite a cheap way, because you're just adding cash as opposed to having to sell and then buy things. So it's something that does benefit us as a fund. We do expect that to gradually decline over the kind of the next few years. As things like deficit recoveries are getting on track, there'll be extra payments there. CPI has historically sort of outstripped things like pay awards, but it's good while it's good while it lasts, as it were. Going on to page 48, there's figure here, which is worth sort of pulling out, and you'll sort of appreciate, I suppose the focus of the pension committee in some ways. You'll see the kind of the employer contributions ratio to member contributions, and it's worth noting, it's not just the fact that the employers put 4 times as much money in as the members. It's also the fact that the members level is fixed, whereas the employers is variable. The employers have to pay what they need to pay. Hence, that's kind of things like the committee, why the employee representatives are non-voting, because it basically everything falls onto the employers themselves, and obviously that's sort of that conscious sort of being very conscious that any decision that the committee makes can have a direct impact on the employer's business, as it were. Moving down the next sections on administration, obviously Ian and Stuart cover this a lot, but the chart on page 49 is quite interesting. You'll see kind of like an inflection in that contributors, and basically it's kind of primarily driven by the local authorities. We used to have austerity, and we've still got financial pressure, but it tends to be demand type pressures on social care, etc. So you can see kind of the savings that authorities were making is kind of tailed off a bit, but having to reinvest in services. So it's kind of quite an interesting little thing that's reflecting in the chart there. Moving down, like I say, I won't touch on much of the admin section. You get down to the investment policy and performance section on page 54 is kind of the next one I was going to pick up, and you'll hear a lot of people talk about the strategic asset allocation. It's a kind of a key tool really for kind of setting out what we're going to be investing in the fund, and that sets out what the risk and desired return that we're trying to get. And you can kind of see from that little table, we haven't done a great job of sticking to the strategic asset allocation, which ordinarily would be a bit of a problem being that sort of far out. But the truth is, it's kind of one of those that it was the right thing to not adhere to it, because we were waiting for funds to launch with LGPS Central. So you're in that sort of boat. You're waiting for Central. You could go out and appoint a manager independently, but the cost of transition to that manager to untransition is just kind of wouldn't be worth it. And to be honest, it's just one of those unfortunate sort of timing things. The funds have now launched with Central, so that sort of benchmark correction has been put in place. Go down a little bit to the bottom of the table on page 54. You see the fund's actual investment performance, so how much money do we make against benchmark? And the first thing I'd pull out is if you look at the sort of the 3 years and the 5 years performance, sort of on it, that's, if you take the 5 years, that's 9.5%, so nearly 10% every year year out for the last 5 years. And it's worth bearing in mind, we've had the COVID pandemic in there, which, kicked off sort of a world-changing kind of event. Industries sort of shut that you wouldn't normally expect to be shut. Repercussions still ongoing, but the investment returns, and it's not just this fund, it's all funds, were just sort of held up, and you just wouldn't know there'd been such a significant recession in there. So it's quite remarkable, really. The downside, I suppose, is that when we do the valuations, we kind of what the actuaries tend to do is they look back at what's happened and then sort of just take it out of the future. So sometimes you sometimes you can never win, but it is worth bearing in mind or noting as well that that 9.5 is well above what we aim for in the valuation. So that's good news in terms of deficit recovery periods as well. This section in the report that's really grown, so it starts on page sort of 56, 57, is responsible investing. And this is kind of just continues to be sort of an increasing focus. And it reflects in the resources going into it as well. One sort of side benefit of pooling has been the creation of a sort of a central responsible investment team as well. And they've got about half a dozen people in there, so which is far more resources than we could have afforded to have sort of having a fund on our own dedicated to this area. So that's sort of really good and positive, and they get obviously synergies from working on a pool basis as well. The focus is sort of increasingly is around kind of the reporting on the sort of fund assets. You've picked up a lot of the coverage of COP26, and there's a lot of talk there about how are people doing double counting of kind of carbon or undercounting of carbon, stuff like that. And it's no different on a fund basis. Rules are kind of are gradually being put in place for how people should report, and we do reasonably well on listed equities, but it is difficult on the sort of on a lot of the other areas. But you'll see there's reference to the TCFD kind of quite a bit in this paper, and through the TCFD the big focus is kind of on improvement on the sort of the reporting and how you go about it, and that's really helpful because it does create a focus on it. So this task force of climate-related financial disclosures, is kind of what it does what it says on the tin. So that does help align effort, because obviously if you're a company and you've got dozens of pension funds coming to you asking for different information, you get nowhere, as it were. So if going sort of further down into that section, we haven't included this before, but on page 62 and 63, we've started to include some of the metrics that come with this report, and these will get updated sort of in November when we sort of refresh them. But you see the managers are kind of pretty much doing what they expect. If you look at that table on kind of like say on page 62, you see the kind of the active equities there. The carbon footprint is a lot lower than kind of the wider market, as it were. So they're making choices to target kind of I suppose less carbon intensive, and there is two reasons behind that. One is, carbon, big sort of heavy industry has become out of fashion quite a bit, but also kind of technology has become very much in fashion, which is much sort of lower carbon footprint. So that helps a lot. The anomaly is the passives, and passives just mirror the benchmark, so you don't get any benefit from them. Hence the overall position is kind of a little bit of a decline, but or a little bit of reduction in terms of the portfolio's carbon footprint. We wouldn't expect our managers to make sort of big drastic moves. So, and there's a couple of kind of reasons for that. The world is kind of going to be a carbon producer for a long time. There's a lot of industries in there, so you can't just kind of focus on the non-carbon industries. You can skew what you're doing, but you'd be missing out on a big part of the sort of the investable universe, as it were, if you moved away from those too much. But the other factor is actually a lot of those companies who do generate carbon are helping with the carbon transition. One of our biggest sort of carbon emitters of the full fund is the Taiwan Semiconductor Corporation. If you don't have semiconductors, you don't have electric vehicles, kind of thing. But it's quite a carbon intensive process. So it is all about sort of bearing in mind it's a transition, not a knee jerk kind of reaction. Moving down the next section of the report, page 64 onward, is about pooling. There's a lot of tables in here, full of their financial tables, but they're not that sort of helpful, I'm quite honest. But I suppose to give the board some assurance, we're moving quicker than average within our pool. In terms of that pooling, I mean, we've taken the view that we're having to pay for the kind of the establishment of the company, and if if Centra are able to do what they said they're able to do, and sort of funds targeting the right sort of areas and cheaper than what we've currently got, would transition across. So and it helps just we get the savings quicker. So that's what the approach we've taken. So the pooling's going okay, a little bit slower than you'd hope. Mentioned that before, but it is getting there. But like I say, I won't bore you with all those tables. And then that brings us into the accounts again, sort of big lengthy document, a lot of defined sort of tables you have to put in there is more for the accountant's benefits rather than kind of the end user's benefits, which is never great. So I'll pick out a few of the key bits. If you go to page 75 is the kind of what the movements in and out of the fund for the year on a kind of an accountant basis. And you'll see there the kind of the big figure by far, both in terms of 1920 and 2021, is the investment returns. Both in sort of bad years and good years, it's the dominant figure. So that's the thing we have to kind of be mindful of. It swamps what happens with sort of both even employer contributions, which is kind of the second biggest figure there. So it's kind of that's why we kind of keep a focus on it. It's why we do things like take the responsible investment approach we do. We're not a divestor, we're kind of an engager and an influencer is the aim. Go down to the next one I was going to peel out, was on page 81, and it breaks out. It's quite an interesting one there. You can see for the employers and the members a bit more detail there, and you've got the normal underlying sort of money that the employers put in, 170 million pounds is the rump of this. But the thing that they're kind of getting our ear most about is the deficit recovery kind of stuff, or deficit repair as it's called there. So it's only 10 million out of the kind of the 200 million, so circa 5% of what they put in. But that's the bit that they kind of shout at us about and want to get down. It's quite interesting. I picked out that point before about the member stuff is kind of quite a bit lower than the employers. The other piece that I touched on before was about the fund manager fees. If you go down to page 83, it breaks those expenses out quite a bit more, and it figures in there that you don't normally see in truth. So the first one I pick out is the transaction costs in the middle of that second table, 13 million pounds, and that's if you ever see kind of fund manager costs advertised, it doesn't often include transaction costs, and that's been a kind of a big thing over the last few years. It's hidden from the headline rate, but it's really expensive. You've got a manager who's doing a lot of trading, that's where it comes in. Or in our case at the moment, we're doing quite a few transitions from one fund to another, and again, that's where it'll hit you there. So those costs should hopefully come down over the next few years as we finish our transitions, but they're always going to be sort of pretty significant. And the other big figure you'll see there, performance-related fees, which always annoys people when they sort of see it, that the fund manager's making not just money but more money from us. But at the end of the day, that you get performance-related fees because the fund has increased in size so much. And you look at the previous year, it kind of does what it needs to do. So when you have a bad year, they hardly get anything. When you have a good year, they do get kind of money. We don't have a huge amount of performance fees in the fund, but there's certain areas of the market you just can't get away from. If you want to invest in private equity or infrastructure, you're going to have to incur performance fees. That's what I was going to go through on the accounts. The final part of the annual report, when you sort of scroll all the way down, is the governance section, and that's kind of starts on page 111. So it's quite a bit of the way through the report, and you kind of see there most of the there's a few new bits that we've put in there, just sort of members sort of benefit, this sort of trainings and attendance at meetings. So it's kind of, they're published publicly now, so it's a bit more visible than they have been before. So obviously kind of important that we keep those numbers looking good, because we do need sort of people engaged in the meetings and understand what they're doing. The other bit in that sort of governance statement is worth looking at is that sort of is it a self-assessment of how compliant we are. And you see most things are kind of ticked off as compliant. There's an awful lot of work from different teams in terms of trying to make sure we do what we need to do. So we'll tick off most of those things there. It's a bit disappointing we still don't have the final good governance kind of outcomes, but we've used the sort of the independent advisor to kind of in proxy of any kind of external reviews to just kind of keep us honest with sort of taking a bit of an external perspective. And you can see that down on page 124, 120, 25. So that's all I was going to say on the report. It's basically happy to take any comments back, which will form form part of the report to the committee later in November.
Thank you. And now we all got a headache because that was quite comprehensive. I can't see you, by the way, Declan. I can only see, now that's better. I have only got two very, very basic comments. Now, the report ended March 31st, 21. So I think just for the record, we need to note that some members, which are identified on page 44, have changed now due to election and whatever else, just in case we got questions. And I'm finding, being a little bit of a dim person, and I did try to read last night, but there are a lot of acronyms I don't understand. And I was wondering if in future there could be maybe a page. I mean, for instance, on page 67 at the bottom, it says BPS, basic points charged based on asset under management, you know, but it means very little to me. But and it's not you, I've noticed it is a Tom Huaric, refers to Libor, Libor. Now, I haven't got a clue and I have looked what that means. So maybe some, you know, just like a terms of reference sheet somewhere and just tell me what Libor means, because it booked me all since last night.
Well, I'll have a chat with sort of Ian and Bullish about maybe just putting a glossary in to just sort of open some of these terms out. But LIBOR is the London Interbank overnight rate, and it's basically the rate of money. It's the rate that basic banks charge each other for borrowing off each other. And this is and it was LIBOR that you've heard it of. There was this big scandal around sort of banks sort of doing the rigging on this and stuff. So you'll be glad to know LIBOR's gone and Sonia is now coming in. And don't ask me what Sonia means. I can't even remember that.
Oh, well. Anyway, are there any questions? Councillor Shepherd, Manjid, Caroline? Oh, Manjid, yes, please, over to you, Manjid.
Thank you, Chair. It may be relevant, it may not be relevant. Declan, good morning. I know you've got there's another section there in terms of responsible investment update. I wonder if it might be captured there, but I'll ask it now and you can tell me if it's relevant for now. In terms of the, I'm really interested in the investment in terms of ethical investment or environmental investment you sort of touched on there. Is there a sort of a review that's already taken place in terms of a scan of the environment that we operate in terms of where we're investing currently, and perhaps a view of a divestment plan from the sort of carbon investments that maybe we have invested in throughout our sort of agents, etc., to moving away from those, taking on board what you said earlier on, Declan, which is you can't just switch one from one to the other. There has to be a plan because you're looking to sort of taper that, I guess, change over a period of time. Is that something that we're looking to do, and is there a sort of tentative timescale so that do we sort of meet the objectives that some of the objectives that COP have set as well in terms of getting to a net zero contribution, perhaps in terms of investment by a certain date as well?
It's where we're going. We don't have those sort of targets as of yet, but it's kind of, I suppose I will pick it up in the next paper, but it's kind of the next task on the list almost, as it were, about sort of setting targets. It's a difficult one because the pension fund does in some ways you replicate the world that kind of is around you, and you sort of in the certain areas. I mean, people talk about kind of where the pension fund should be sort of leading or not, but you've got that balance between, the employers are entrusting their kind of money with us, as it were. So we kind of, it's limited what we can do. The key thing for the pension fund is that we have to recognise climate change risk, and climate change is a by its nature, world-changing event. So you'd be daft not to recognise it's going to be a key thing, and it's going to change, I suppose, the financial return from different companies. So it's something the fund has to recognise, but at the same time, it's kind of that transition thing is really key, that you can't just, like I say, you can't just turn it off. It's a move over time. The focus at the moment is very much trying to make sure that managers are recognising climate change risk and doing something about it, and the companies they invest in aren't going to get caught with, I don't know, people talk about stranded assets, but it's bigger than that. It's, carbon taxes, things like that. They are performing an orderly transition. So you will see over the next few years that just ramping up, and the focus in terms of what we're doing, but also targets coming in, which we should be setting sort of early next year. So. Okay,
that's helpful, because I think other colleagues mentioned, Ian and the other colleague, that obviously we're sort of, as a pension fund, an authority managing the pension fund, we're sort of driving some of the agenda items there. And I thought maybe that in terms of the environmental agenda, is that something at the right time, at the appropriate time, once the scans and evaluation have been done and obviously reviewed and agreed by the relevant people, that would then put together a plan of what we'd like to do and what targets we'd like to aim for going forward, without having a detrimental impact on the returns from the investments we make. Obviously, that's very, very important and key as well.
Yeah, no, it is. It's that balance. But yeah, you're right. The targets are coming. It's part of it's through this climate task force kind of disclosure. That I can't remember how many they've told us, but we have to report on so many metrics and have targets on others as well. And it's going to be a devil to set the targets, because I mentioned on sort of like the Taiwan sort of semiconductor corporation. I think they're one of our top 3 carbon emitters as a pension fund, but you wouldn't want to divest from them. No. From anyone's, and I think our number 1 emitter is actually the world's largest solar and wind energy producer. And again, the reason they've got high carbon emissions is because they all also use gas power. They're a big sort of US kind of company, and they see gas, which a lot of companies and countries indeed do, as a sort of a transitional kind of thing. So it's difficult. You kind of I'm not quite sure at this stage how you set targets that sort of keep everybody happy. And I think the answer is you can, but you sort of you will end up with carbon in the fund for quite a while. But it's just making sure it's the right sort of use of that carbon, as it were.
Because I think you're right. I think we as a board need to be aware of this, obviously, and I think we are, that because the agenda is out there anyway. There might be more and more questions coming from our members themselves, the people who contribute to pensions, say, okay, what are we doing? So just to raise that awareness here on this board, to say, look, what are we doing? When are we doing something? And can we be sort of ahead of the game in that sense, in terms of thinking about it in the planning going forward?
Yeah, no, you're right. We're seeing that on the committee side as well, that there's sort of more and more questions coming through.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Declan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Manjit. Aren't you picking that up as well in report number 10, Declan? I think you are, aren't you? Anyway, no further question on this report, so thank you for that, Declan. And now we're scrolling down to pages 129 to 138, item 8 on our agenda. Now, that is our local pension board annual report 2021, and which I hope you have all read. Now, it gives you a flavour of what we've considered throughout the year. And the next step of this is for the report to go to the local pension committee and then to the pension fund AGM. I have to thank Kat for all the work she put into it. And Caroline and I have had an input into this report as it stands before you. And I think, even if I say so myself, it is a very good report. And over to you if you've got any comments on that report before you. Thank you. There are no comments from members. So as this is a decision item, do I assume that the report can be agreed to go forward? Not me. Yes, everybody. So thank you very much for that. Very much appreciated. Thank you, Kat, and everybody else involved. And we are now moving over to page 139. Give me a chance, because that went too quickly. Well, anyway, 139 to everybody. That is the Pension Fund Policy Report. And that is over to dear Stuart again to introduce it. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide an annual update of the fund's policies, focusing on any new policies that have been introduced or any existing ones that have been amended. The report includes a summary that shows the current policies, when they were last updated and when the next review is due. A link to the policies is at the bottom of page 139. As Ian explained, there have been some minor changes to the admin and comms strategy, where an expansion of the circumstances have been made around these transfers that Ian was touching upon. Nationally, funds are seeing an increase in requests from academies to move all the members to other funds, as Ian mentioned, and we've included this now in our admin and comms strategy to make sure that a charge allows us to offset the costs. There's also been two other new policies that have been developed, and this is a formalisation of what already is in place. So these are the distribution of death grants report and also the under and overpayment of pension reports. With regards to the distribution of death grants, many cases are straightforward, but some can be complex. So a clear policy on distribution does help us manage that process. And the same with the overpayments of pensions. Having that published policy is going to help us manage those cases more straightforwardly going forward. So I think this is a report where people are invited to make comments if they wish.
Thank you. I'm unmuted. As no hands up just yet, couple of questions from me. One is page 161, help desk is being introduced. Can you give me a little bit of further information where, how, and how can it be accessed? And then just underneath it, there are administration charges, a little bit more of an update on that. And then while I was reading it, hang on, and I've lost it. Well, answer me that and then I'll come back, please.
Okay.
Help desk.
Right.
Page 161.
161, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, sorry, the question was how's the help desk progressing?
Yeah, well, when is it being introduced? A little bit more detail. How is it, you know, how can it be accessed, etc., etc.?
Okay. So this is an internal help desk within the pension section that was set up at the start of the year. So we've taken existing members but added some new technology, and this has really been designed to help us manage calls better. So it has introduced a small queuing system, but the time taken to answer the calls is extremely low. So it's just letting people know that they are in a queue and we are able to answer their calls. So it's just assisted us a bit more in terms of being able to allocate work to people that aren't on the help desk on any particular time. So yeah, that's been going quite well, really.
And it is sort of appreciated and supported by members of staff, I assume, because I see Caroline nodding. Oh, good. Well, that doesn't answer. That answers my question then. And the administration charges, just underneath that, yeah. Are people aware of that? Because I agree with that, but you know, are they aware from the outset?
They will be. So when they initially contact us, all the charges are listed in documentation that's posted to them.
Okay, so now to my main point, Stuart. As I was reading this, just to prove I was, I got to page 206. and I sort of made loads and loads of notes, and then as I got to the end of the report, I realised that in report 10 my concerns were addressed. Great minds think alike, and you've put my concerns in as a new risk, number 9. However, I still would like to talk about the Appendix D on page 206. So we are talking about overpayment. So I assume all the way through overpayment only applies to death grants, or does it apply to other things as well? If so, my question is, why does this occur? Is it a control failure? And I know you put things into place later on in report number 1, but it doesn't explain actually how often. And another point, because it says here, pension managers write off 5 to 10,000 assistant director, and over 10,000, it obviously goes to the LGPS. So I'd just like to get my head around it. Does it happen very often? How much have we paid out in overpayment? How is it set out? Do we write them off straight away, or do we say, I mean, my daughter does it in her company, and then they say, you know, you have to pay it back, and people say, oh, well, we can't, so we're paying back 50 pence a week. So just get my head around this. Control failure, or is it normally the people who are doing it fraudulent? How often does it happen? How much have we paid out? Do we have a payback scheme? What is the value of all the overpayments so far? Just talk me through it a little bit more. Thank
you. Okay. So cases are rare. It's not normally death grants where we would make an overpayment. This would normally be the ongoing pension. So cases would occur if typically human error has resulted in the wrong figure being paid. So off the top of my head, there was an example where a long-term pension, so when a widow's pension is payable for the first 3 months, it's paid at a higher rate. It's known as the short-term pension. Then that drops down to the long-term pension, which is paid at a lower rate. So that there has been an occasion where the lower rate wasn't introduced and the higher rate continued to be paid. So that was picked up when the person died. And we were looking at the calculations of the pension. So it's that kind of thing where essentially human error has played a part. So in terms of whether it's a control failure, I guess the controls could be better. And with that in mind, one of the reporting tools that the reporting tool that I mentioned in my report earlier, Insights, is going to allow us to be more on the ball with these, to allow regular reporting where we compare the pension that's in payment with the administration system. And this will allow us to pick these up quicker, resulting in smaller overpayments. In terms of, I think there's been a couple of cases this year, but generally these are pretty rare. But it's just a case of getting a policy in place just to make sure that we've got those controls if these do occur.
Well, I've noticed, like I said, great minds think alike, because on my paper I have got a great big note, introduce a risk factor, and then you did, and you set out already quite a lot of, remedial action. But what do we have a payback scheme? So if, say, for instance, something happens where, we rather than saying, right, it's only £5,000, we're going to pay it off, but do we say maybe if there is a death grant or something, and when the death happened to the executor of the will or whatever, you have to pay this back? Or do we assume straight away that it goes to a write-off? And do we have a value of, do we look at it as an annual value or overall? Because it just, a bit more on that, please, if you can.
Oh, okay. So we treat each case on its own individual merits. We find that most cases are different to each other. In the case where someone had died and the overpayment had arisen, we took the decision to write that one off. We liaised with the employer to make them aware of what had happened. So we went through the process as is described here, and we got agreements from all cases. Where the overpayment is spotted and a pension is in payment, so the person hasn't died, then we would then contact the person. We would correct the payment, and then we would address the issue of the overpayment, and we would be looking to recover as much as we can, but we would have to be mindful of the value of the pension and how practical it's going to be to get money from them.
Okay, and last one, because it would be remiss of me if I don't raise this, do we have a value of the overpayments, and how often do we sort of monitor them? Sorry, I start again. Do we have a record of the write-off and, and the value of the overpayments, and do we monitor them?
I don't think we've got an amount that we record anywhere in respect of total overpayments, but we've been monitoring them on an annual basis before, a sort of biannual basis, just to compare pensions in payment to those that are held on the administration system. But it is something that we are looking to address going forward, and we're going to be monitoring this more regularly. But yeah, at the moment, I'm not aware that we've got a published figure of overpayments anywhere that's reported.
Thank you.
May I come in?
Yes.
Yeah, may I come in? I think Stuart and everything Stuart said is completely correct and spot on. In terms of the value, I don't think we do have a published value, but the one high value amount was the one that was taken through to the pensions committee for approval as well. Although Chris Tambini had the ultimate sign off on that case, it was taken through committee for awareness as well for review, and that's the only significant value that I can recall for, I think, probably 2 years. But I don't think we have a published value.
My battery's running low.
But it's certainly something we could collate. In future we could collate those values.
Well, hang on. Yes, I think it might. Well, I'll leave it up to you. It might be something well worth considering as part of, a best value and, a risk consideration. Sorry about that. My battery is running low. Right. Do I see any other hands up? Thank you for that, Stuart, and thank you, Ian. There are no. Manjit? No. Okay. Thank you for that report, Stuart. So we are now going to item number 10 on our agenda, which is page 209 to 214, and that is our responsible investment update, and it is Declan again. Over to you, Declan.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
This report is basically our second, it focuses really on our second responsible investment plan. I just wanted to point out, that doesn't mean we've only been sort of trying to improve responsible investment for a couple of years. It's just this, I don't know, we've reached a tipping point, I suppose, where it felt worthwhile putting in a more structured plan rather than just kind of doing things as and when. Just to, I suppose, again, by way of reminder, the report goes into it. Responsible investment, we do focus across the sort of the ESG, you know, environmental, social and governance type factors, and you can boil that down. The reason we do that is basically better run companies. The assumption is that better run companies will give you better long-term investment returns, not always in the short term, you know, kind of people kind of squeeze assets or whatever, but you know, it's that long-term kind of approach that we're looking for. And in terms of kind of the going into the report, paragraph 8 gives a sort of pretty good summary actually of sort of the approach we do try and take around responsible investment, and it breaks it down to that long-term view I've just mentioned, support sort of financial returns, but also engagement, not exclusion, you know, sort of and the debate, it comes up a lot around that, you know, why don't you just sort of divest, kind of manage, used sort of a bit of the language before, although in fairness you did sort of balance it, but we get a lot from the kind of the pressure groups about we'll just sell everything, and the problem with you can sell everything, but actually it doesn't make a jot of difference to the world's carbon footprint. You know, if we sell our holdings in Shell, for example, someone else just buys them, or ultimately if everybody sort of sells too much, these companies just go private or just end up in state actors kind of hands, so it doesn't make any difference. So hence it's seen as the best approach, both for kind of the fund, but actually as well probably for sort of for encouraging climate transition is to have that engagement type approach. The most visible part of sort of our I suppose our responsible investment is voting, you know, and we've sort of made improvements in that, again primarily linked with what Central do, and but also using sort of people like Legal in General as well, who hold a lot of our assets, in terms of those actually going and sort of voting on a range of issues at sort of different sort of annual general meetings, etc. So there's about sort of 3/4 of the funds you can have voting rights on, and we've sort of got voting on about sort of 2/3 of those. There's more work to do on some of the kind of the privately held type investments, but we're looking to increase those levels as we go through. Get down into paragraph 14 and mention that sort of, you know, responsible investment isn't just about climate change, it's across the whole range of things, and that's sort of reflected in paragraph 14, and these are LGPS Central's kind of 4 kind of focus areas. And you'll see, obviously, you'd expect climate to be in there, but there's others well to try and give it a bit of a balance. I mentioned before, sort of in the annual report, the TCFD, the sort of the sort of the task force, and it's kind of, it touches on sort of what we did talk about in sort of the annual report, and it's going to get repeated back to committee in November, so we'll get an update on those metrics. So we'll start to be able to sort of see a little bit of a trend over time of what we're doing. And then the final part of the report is it just touches on the RI plan that's in place at the moment, and we are broadly on track with what's there. And there's going to be a new plan produced probably for sort of approval in January by the committee to keep that kind of fresh. And the main challenge that I did mention before is going to be setting targets, because it's just blooming difficult, to be honest, and it'll end up as long-term type targets. You know, there's going to be, between years, things are going to change in terms of, you know, things could go worse just because of the way metrics are produced, or just because of where fund managers see the sort of financial opportunities we have to stay mindful of. But on a long-term basis, you would expect a decline in kind of the carbon content of the fund. So that's kind of pretty much where we are. So happy to take any questions on the RI plan.
Thank you.
I
keep muting myself, yes. Thank you very much, Declan, much appreciated. And are there any questions? Councillor Shepherd? No. Manjit? No. Caroline? No. Well, that concludes that report. Thank you very much, Declan. Right, and that we are now moving on to item 11 on our agenda, which is risk management and internal controls, page 215 to 230, and that is back to Ian, please. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. This is the fund risk register. So this is the risk register that covers both the administration and the investment side. What we do is we present this to the board at each meeting, and indeed the committee at each meeting, and the risks. Each risk has a score, and then once we've taken account of any changes or mitigating actions we can make, we then have a revised score. The scores are all on the appendix themselves. There are two points I just particularly wanted to mention. The first is a new risk that we've added, risk number 9. And this is the failure to identify the death of a pensioner causing an overpayment or potential fraud or other financial irregularity. And what's occurred, and this kind of links into what Stuart was talking about earlier about the overpayments. We used the Faraday system. Faraday is a third-party system that we use, and a company that we provide our data to securely, and then they do checks to ensure that any deaths reported to them, and they can get this information from a variety of sources, are then reported to us, and we then check those to our systems. And if we've not been notified of a death, we then investigate it to avoid potentially that payment continuing incorrectly. But Faraday doesn't work for overseas pensioners. That's the issue we've currently found. And the national fraud system only takes place once every 2 years. So we're looking at targeting a review of that, which will effectively mean that we can do these overseas pensioner checks twice a year rather than once every 2 years to avoid future potential for overpayments. So that's a new risk that we've added. And the second one is an existing risk, which is McLeod, which is risk number 4. Going on from the point that Stuart again mentioned earlier about the failure of the Hayward pensions system to upload the data as was expected using the LGA's template, and therefore corrupting members' records. We've increased the risk on McLeod until that's resolved. Now, hopefully that will be resolved quickly. As I say, we're waiting for commitment from the system provider, and hopefully we'll be able to bring that risk back down when that's working again. So we've just increased the risk temporarily. I have made a note from the earlier conversation, and I'll look again at the risk register for the next board meeting to include the claims management companies and also the cost cap, the 2016 cost cap, which I think I will probably link into McLeod, because the potential is for those two to possibly dovetail. So that's all I was going to say on the report, but happy to take any questions.
Councillor Shepherd, but before he comes in, yes, I'm very pleased you included risk number 9, because, as I say, I've noticed that in the previous report, as I said to Stuart, but that refers, the risk number 9 just refers to death, doesn't it? So should that include, if you reflect back on our previous conversation with Stuart just now, also, overpayments, as he mentions, other overpayments, or should that be a separate risk? So if somebody, being paid out, do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, yeah. I'll consider that, yeah. I think in my mind it's a separate risk in truth, but I will consider that, and I'll work work out
Yes.
the best way to take that forward, and I'll liaise with you prior to the next meeting, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's all I can ask.
Yeah,
Councillor
thanks.
Shepherd, over to you.
Thank you. Could I refer, excuse me, to risks 11, 12 and 13? I noticed they're the ones where the residual risk remains at amber. I don't think they include McLeod, which we just referred to. If they do, I beg your pardon. Do you see any likelihood of that residual risk being able to be brought down in the future?
For 11, 12 and 13, Councillor
Yes.
Shepherd. So 11, the assets held by the fund are ultimately insufficient to pay benefits due to individual members. 12, sub-funds of individual employers are not monitored to ensure that there is the correct balance between risk to the fund and fair treatment of the employer. 13, market investment returns are consistently poor, and this causes significant upward pressure onto employer contribution rates. Let me see. So right, okay. Just trying to widen my screen slightly so I can see all of those. I think the first one, I don't see 11 becoming significantly higher, because that's what the actuarial valuation and the assumptions should avoid. So I think the risk will remain, and I think it will always remain a significant risk because it's got such a significant impact if it was to go that way. But I don't think it would increase. I wouldn't like to think it would increase beyond the current position of 8 for number 11. 12. Okay. Again, this links into the valuation as well. Dialogue with the employers, particularly in the lead up to the setting of new employer contribution rates. We've started that exercise already, Councillor Shepherd. We are starting to liaise with the employers that we believe are arguably the highest risk, which is really the further education bodies at this stage, in truth. Depending on what they provide back to us in terms of because we're asking them to give their interpretation of how they believe they present a risk as well to the fund. I think once we see that information back from them, I think we'll be better placed to then make a judgment on that, and then also working with Hymans. So again, I think the risk remains because there's volatility in that sort of market, in that sector. I think further education bodies will always remain a risk to the fund, but we can work to mitigate that. But I think the risk will always be a reasonably high risk in that category until something fundamentally changes in terms of either the regulations or the education sector in terms of the way they're funded. Investment market returns consistently poor. And I think, as Boulash has pointed out there, making sure that the investment strategy is sufficiently flexible to take account of opportunities. I think we do that well. I think the risk there arguably is what Declan was talking about earlier, in the responsible investments and how that's going to impact into this area. But it's a changing picture. But I think our investment strategy is strong and it's reviewed regularly. So I don't anticipate that would grow. I don't know whether Declan has any comment on any of those three particular points.
I think to add, really, I mean, we obviously sort of employ a lot of advice with the fund to help us make the decision, and kind of the investment returns over the last few years have been better than we I suppose we'd hope for. So we kind of, and part of that is just good performance, and part of it is because we do put quite a bit of prudence in there that helps as well. So we're never on the edge of actually sort of having to chase returns, which brings its own problems. And I think that the risks are well managed at the moment, and we kind of as provided we keep a kind of a well diversified fund, so we're not just investing in equities. We've got infrastructure, we've got forests in there, we've got government debt, all sorts of different things. So we've got kind of a broad range of investments, and we continue to sort of take a lot of I suppose pay quite a bit of money for advice as well.
May I come back for a moment?
Please do.
Thank you. So in summary, if I understand correctly, you foresee all three risks, 11, 12, 13, likely to remain residual risk of amber, but you don't think it's going to be any of them will approach red.
That would be my take on that, yes.
Thank you.
I think, sorry, just one final point to that. And it's important as well, even if we have a bad year as a fund, we take 20, 30-year time horizons, and that cures a lot of evils, as it were. So that tends to be the other sort of key factor.
Thank you, understood. Thank you very much.
Right. Councillor Shepherd, is that all for today? Are you happy?
Yes, thank you very much. That's all
okay.
today.
Manjit, anything? Are you happy? He's happy. And Caroline, last but not least, anything? Are you happy so far?
Very happy, thank you.
Good. So then, thank you to all the officers. That concludes our business for this year. And the date of our next meeting, it is on a Wednesday rather than on a Monday, and it will be on Wednesdays. And it will be Wednesday, the 16th of February at 10 a.m, same place. And if everybody is happy, shall we carry on Teams rather than meeting? Yeah, knots all around, because I think it's quite useful. Okay, that's 3 knots to note, Kat. There is nothing else that is urgent, and I can close this meeting, but I am going to say the dreaded word. Let me be the first one to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year if I don't see you until next year. Thank you all, and I close this meeting, but can I ask Kat and Ian to stay on just 1 second, because I've got to ask you a question. For everybody else, safe journey home and stay warm.
Happy Christmas to you, Phil.
Thank you.